Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. This lecture is about post-colonial literature. In order to understand post-colonial, first of all, we need to understand what is meant by colonial or what is meant by colony. And then we'll talk about the post-colonial. We know that European countries, a few of them, from the four corners of the globe, that is, they went to Africa, to Asia, to South America, North America, and they looted other people's land. They looted their resources, their minerals, even their labor, and because of this, they grew filthy rich, all of them, because of them. These lands were taken by these people by force, of course. No politeness was used, there was no pretense of politeness. They just grabbed the lands. And they justified this taking of the lands, looting of the land, the resources, and the labor. They justified all this looting um, by saying that they were white and that they were better than the people they had conquered, and that they were civilized, and the people they made the colony of were savages, and therefore they should have been the masters. And as a result, these places which they attacked and took by force became their slaves, and such an area which is occupied by force and is exploited. The resources are taken, the labor of the area is used, the minerals are taken, and the place is completely under the domination of this uh, force. This is called, the place is called a colony. It's a kind of slave country. So this is what is meant by colonization, colonialism, or colony. Pakistan, that is India, which was called India then, was also a colony, and it was referred to as British colony, which we will discuss now. The justification, of course, was a kind of excuse, because there is no, what kind of justification is this when you say that we are white and you are black, and that we are better and that you are worse, and that we are civilized and you are savages? This justification was just a pretense, and this was not a justification, or this was a bad justification for this taking away all these things. Then later on, by the early 20th century, these colonies and the people of these colonies, they started liberation movements. There were anti-colonial liberation movements, and they started fighting back. So we know that Britain had many colonies, India, for example, and it got back its independence in 1947, Pakistan as well. And the same was the case with the place Ghana. They took their independence in 1957. They were liberated. These were the British colonies. The British colonies also included Kenya and St. Lucia, and they were also liberated. French colonies like Senegal and Algeria, they also were liberated, and the same was the case with the colonies of Portuguese, which were Angola and Mozambique, and they were also liberated. So this decolonization which took place, the freedom was not only the result of the struggle of politicians and the freedom fighters. Of course, it was the result of politicians and the freedom fighters, but not only them. It was also the struggle of the writers. We call this writing of the writers as post-colonial literature. Post means after. So when these colonies were liberated and the writers of the colonies, they decided to write their own writings according to their own point of view. That is called post-colonial literature. And these movements started, the, the post-colonial literature movement started, and there was a coherent literary movement in the mid 20th century, 1950, 1990s. Though drama and poetry are also important parts of the post-colonial literature, but the novel really defines this movement. So the movement is referred to as post-colonial literature. Now, I hope you understood what is meant by colony, colonial, and what is meant by post-colonial. पोस्ट-colonial लिटरेचर को समझने के लिए हमें colonialism, कॉलोनी या colonial को समझना पड़ेगा। हमें मालूम है कि वेस्टर्न ममालिक जैसे फ्रांस है, बड़े-बड़े ममालिक, बरतानिया है, पोर्चुगीज है, ये वेस्टर्न इलाकों से आए अफ्रीका, एशिया, साउथ अमेरिका, नॉर्थ अमेरिका में, एशिया में हमारे यहाँ ताजरों की शक्ल में, और इन्होंने लोगों की ज़मीनों को पे कब्जा किया, उनकी रिसोर्सेज को लूटा, उनकी मिनरल्स को भी लूटा, और यहाँ तक कि उनको गुलाम बनाकर उनसे लेबर का काम भी लिया और ख़ुद बहुत मालदार हुए। और ये काम इन्होंने बाय फोर्स किया, जोर के बलबूते पर, न कि नरमी के साथ। और बस आए और ज़बरदस्ती कब्जा कर लिया इन जगहों पर, इन तमाम चीज़ों पर। जस्टिफिकेशन इनकी क्या थी? कुछ भी नहीं कि हम सफ़ेद हैं, ये एक जस्टिफिकेशन थी। हम बेहतर हैं, हम सिविलाइज्ड हैं, ये सवेजेस हैं, लिहाजा हमें मास्टर होना चाहिए। और ये माँ सिवाय एक्सक्यूज़ के कोई और बात नहीं थी। तो यही जो बैकवर्ड सवेजेस थे, अनसिविलाइज्ड थे, ये 20th सेंचुरी में उठे और इन्होंने एंटी कॉलोनियल लिबरेशन मूवमेंट्स का आगाज़ किया और इन्होंने फाइट बैक किया। लिहाजा जितनी कॉलोनीज थी या जितनी जगह, कॉलोनी का मतलब है वो जगह जिन पे इन्होंने कब्जा किया हो। तो मिड 20th सेंचुरी में कॉलोनीज जो है आज़ाद होने लगी। इंडिया भी कॉलोनी थी जिसको ऑल इंडिया कहते थे, जिसमें पाकिस्तान भी शामिल था। हमने ब्रिटेन से आज़ादी हासिल की 1947 में, गाना ने भी उन्हें से 1957 में, और कीनिया और सेंट लूसिया ने भी इनसे आज़ादी हासिल की। इसी तरीके से फ्रेंच कॉलोनी सेनेगाल और अल्जीरिया थे, इन्होंने आज़ादी हासिल की। पोर्चुगीज़ ने कब्जा किया था अंगोला और मोज़म्बिक पर, इन्होंने किया। ये सारा काम यकीनन पॉलिटिशियंस और फ्रीडम फाइटर्स की मदद से ही हुआ, लेकिन इसमें यकसा हिस्सा राइटर्स ने भी डाला। और इन राइटर्स ने जो काम किया, यही राइटिंग पोस्ट कॉलोनियल लिटरेचर कहलाती है। ये इमर्ज हुई और एक तहरीक की शक्ल इख्तियार की मिड 20th सेंचुरी में, और इस तहरीक को पोस्ट कॉलोनियलिज्म कहते हैं। और इसमें ड्रामा भी शामिल है, पोइट्री भी शामिल है, लेकिन जो डिफाइनिंग चीज़ है वो नावल है इस मूवमेंट को आगे बढ़ाने के लिए। So the post-colonial writers Uh, they were actually anti-colonial freedom fighters and activists, but they actually used their pen, not the sword. So their battlefield actually was the mind, and they challenged the white people that the white people are better. They challenged this idea, and they wrote, and this was anti-colonial writing, and it was just like the freedom fighters, and they were just like the activists as well. But their battlefield was the mind, while the battlefield of the freedom fighters was the battlefield, of course. So these were the post-colonial writers. They wrote back, and uh, their writing was against them. They had their own points of view. They thought that Britain and France and the other countries, they have been holding the microphone for a long time, and it was now their turn. तो ये डीकोलोनाइजेशन हुई. राइटर्स जो है इन्होंने बड़ा इसमें काम किया, और एंटी कॉलोनियल फ्रीडम फाइटर्स और एक्टिविस्ट की तरह इन्होंने भी चैलेंज किया वाइट पीपल आर बेटर के आइडिया को, और इनका बैटलफील्ड माइंड रहा, जबकि फ्रीडम फाइटर का बैटलफील्ड था. तो यूं पोस्ट कॉलोनियल जो राइटर्स थे ये इमर्ज हुए अफ्रीका में, एशिया में, कैरेबियन कंट्रीज में, साउथ अमेरिका में भी, और इन्होंने लिखा. और इनका ख्याल था कि जो बड़े ममालिक हैं, बस बहुत हो चुकी इनकी, और अब हमारी बारी है, हम अपने पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से इसको करेंगे. Now, why did this happen? Of course, it happens because everybody loves justice. Everyone should be treated fairly. Everyone likes to be treated fairly, and freedom is loved by all. We all want freedom. So this thing therefore happened. Therefore, if you want to dig justice, you will be digging the post-colonial literature. If you want to dig justice, equality, and freedom, you will be digging the post-colonial literature because it is based on justice, equality, and freedom. These people liked these qualities, and this is what they did in their writing. So it was a kind of struggle of the colonized people. The colonizers were not good people, and the colonized people, they struggled for justice, equality, and freedom because they had been brutalized, they had been exploited, and they now wanted to find their own voices, and they were standing up for themselves. Um, as a result, if you are supporting the weak and you are supporting the oppressed and the ones who are exploited, you will actually be into that train, which is the train of post-colonial literature. क्यों पोस्ट colonial literature, और हमें क्या फ़र्क पड़ता है, हम क्यों इंटरेस्ट लें? हम इसलिए इंटरेस्ट लें कि जस्टिस सबको पसंद है, हर बंदा चाहता है उसको फ्रीडम दिया जाए, और जब आप फ्रीडम को, जस्टिस को, इक्वालिटी को डिग करेंगे, उसके बारे में टटोलेंगे, तो आप दरअसल पोस्ट कॉलोनियल लिटरेचर ही को डिग करेंगे, उसी को टटोलेंगे, क्योंकि इन्होंने स्ट्रगल किए, राइटर्स ने भी और फ्रीडम फाइटर्स ने भी, जस्टिस, इक्वालिटी और फ्रीडम की. इनको ब्रूटलाइज किया गया, एक्सप्लॉइट किया गया, और अब ये चाहते थे कि अपनी आवाज़ उठाएं, खड़े हों अपने पाँव पर, और अपनी राइटिंग अपने स्टाइल से लिखें. तो ये तो समझ आपको आ गई है कि पोस्ट कॉलोनियल का क्या मतलब है, कॉलोनियल का क्या मतलब है, और पोस्ट कॉलोनियल लिटरेचर का क्या मतलब है. Now we will try to discuss some of the characteristics of post-colonial literature. The first characteristic is referred to as appropriation of colonial languages. We know the colonizer, they had their language. For example, if the colonizers had English language, then these post-colonial writers would take the language of their colonizer, the language of their masters, and they would turn it on its head. That is, they will misuse this language. A writer from the Caribbean, for example, he may write a novel or a play in English, but he will twist English around and he will make the language sound spoken rather than written, and he will insert a native phrases and terms into that English. So you see, the English is taken without the permission of the owner, the thing is taken, the language is taken, it is even corrupted, it is misused, native phrases are inserted into it. Why would they do so? It is because they want to challenge the authority of the colonial language, that the colonial language is no more in authority and that they are free to do whatever they wanted to do with it. They actually appropriate the colonial language, which means that they take the language that was used to subjugate them, to make them slaves, and use it to challenge their oppressors. The oppressors are the colonizers. ये पहली जो कैरेक्टरिस्टिक है ये अप्रोप्रिएशन ऑफ कॉलोनियल लैंग्वेजेस कहलाता है। कॉलोनियल लैंग्वेज से मुराद उन लोगों की लैंग्वेज है जिन्होंने लूट मार किया है और जो मास्टर बने बैठे हैं। तो पोस्ट कॉलोनियल राइटर्स अपने मास्टर्स की लैंग्वेजेस को लेते थे और उसको अपसाइड डाउन करते थे, उसको करप्ट करते थे, उसको ऐसे पेश करते थे जैसे स्पोकन लैंग्वेज होती है, जो कि रिटन लैंग्वेज है थोड़ी सी डिफरेंट होती है, और उसमें फिर नेटिव फ्रेजेस अपनी लैंग्वेज के भी घुसेड़ देते थे। और ये करते इसलिए थे ताकि जो कॉलोनियल लैंग्वेज है और उसकी अथॉरिटी है वो चैलेंज हो जाए, वो ख़त्म हो जाए, और इसको अप्रोप्रिएशन का नाम दिया जाता था। तो ये एक कैरेक्टरिस्टिक हुई। हम सारी कैरेक्टरिस्टिक्स तो नहीं पढ़ सकते, 2, 3, 4 ही पढ़ लेते हैं, फिर लेक्चर नंबर 2 जो बाद में होगा उन बच्चों के लिए जो कि रिसर्च करना चाहते हैं, तो रिसर्च के लिए थोड़ा सा इसकी एप्लीकेशन भी करेंगे, वो बाद में होगा। चंद कैरेक्टरिस्टिक्स फिलहाल हम कर रहे हैं। The second characteristic of the post-colonial literature was the meta-narrative. Now, the colonizers, if they wanted to tell a story, if they were writers and they wanted to tell a story, in that story they would show that Europeans actually tried to rule over other lesser people, that they were the major people and the other people they ruled were the lesser people, and that these Europeans were themselves designated masters and they were the rulers of the earth. As these characteristics were there, it was their narrative, which is referred to as a meta-narrative, in Urdu translated as bayaniya. So therefore they thought they were justified in ruling the others, and it was their destiny to rule the others, and it was not for their own profit, it was, they believed, or their narrative was that it was for the profit of the people who are being ruled, because they wanted to enlighten the darker people and to civilize them. So this story would be narrated over and over again by the Europeans with their own point of view. The post-colonial writers had problem with this story. The problem was that colonization was never about the enlightenment of the colonized or the civilization of the colonized. It was actually about the economic exploitation, that these people were exploited. This story, however, the above one, was repeated by the colonizers over and over again, and they thought that it was a fact, and they wanted everyone to believe this and accept it as true. So the post-colonial had a problem with this story. This was the problem. The post-colonial writers believed that there is more than one side of the story. The one side of the story was a narrative from the colonizers, but there are other sides of the story from the point of view of the colonized people, because something which is referred to as true and factual is often just one point of view among many. And therefore, if there is a play, there should be many different narratives or meta narratives or different points of view. So, the way that that story is narrated and constructed is from certain point of view or an angle, and that this point of view should be changed and can be changed. So this was referred to as meta narrative. ये दूसरी कैरेक्टरिस्टिक जो है ये मेटा नैरेटिव कहलाती है, जिसको बयानिया कहते हैं. कॉलोनाइजर्स मसलन एक स्टोरी लिखते थे, तो उसमें यूरोपियंस को रूलर्स दिखाया जाता था कि इनकी हुकूमत बेकार लोगों के ऊपर है और ये माने हुए मास्टर्स हैं और ये हक बजानिब हैं क्योंकि यही इनकी किस्मत है कि रूल करें, और ये अपने लिए नहीं कर रहे हैं बल्कि ये लोगों के फ़ायदे के लिए कर रहे हैं ताकि उनको एनलाइटन किया जाए, उनको तालीम दी जाए और उनको सिविलाइज किया जाए. ये हम इसलिए कब्ज़ा कर रहे हैं कि लोगों की बेहतरी हो. पोस्ट कॉलोनियल राइटर्स इस स्टोरी में प्रॉब्लम उनको ये थी, दिक्कत ये थी कि ये एक पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू है उनका, और उनका ख्याल ये है कि इन्होंने एनलाइटन किया है जिनको कॉलोनाइज्ड किया है, लेकिन ये एनलाइटनमेंट की तो बात ही नहीं, ये तो बात ही इकोनॉमिक एक्सप्लॉइटेशन की. और कॉलोनाइजर्स ने इस स्टोरी को रिपीट किया, इस किस्म की स्टोरीज को, इस किस्म के मेटा नैरेटिव्स को, बयानिए को, और चाहा कि हर एक शख्स इसको एक्सेप्ट करे, कॉलोनाइज्ड लोग भी एक्सेप्ट करें. लेकिन जो पोस्ट कॉलोनियल राइटर्स थे उन्होंने कहा कि हम इसको एक्सेप्ट नहीं करते, किसी भी स्टोरी का एक पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू नहीं हो सकता जिसको ट्रू और फैक्चुअल समझा जाए, बहुत सारे पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू हो सकते हैं. हमारा नैरेटिव या मेटा नैरेटिव ये नहीं है, हम अपने नैरेटिव के हिसाब से कहानी सुनाएंगे. सो दिस वाज द second characteristic of post-colonial literature. The next characteristic is referred to as colonialism. We know that those people who were colonized, they had a traumatic experience because they were made converted into slaves, and their stuff was taken, and they were forced to learn the languages of the colonizers. The environment was destroyed, the culture of the colonized were destroyed, their livelihood was destroyed, everything was taken from them. After independence, when they got their freedom, they had to suffer from its effects, the effects of the colonization, the depression they had passed through. The indigenous languages, they were displaced with the languages of the colonizers, and even the indigenous religions, they were also abandoned when the missionaries, English Christian missionaries, converted the people to Christianity. And even the post-colonial nations that emerged after independence were modeled along Western style European nations, as even now in Pakistan we have the effect of Europeans. So that was the thing there, and in many other things in our country as well, which are modeled along the Western style European nations and with the same type of administrative and bureaucratic setup. So this thing happened. Uh, even uh, some of the people, though they even uh, started writing against the colonialism, but there were others who liked colonialism, that is, who copied the uh, colonizers. So these people, these writers sometimes, they were obsessed with the colonized countries and uh, some of them, of course, challenged them, but some of them were in favor. And this thing, the consequences of colonization, they extended well beyond the actual period of decolonization. It is said that the writers are still dealing with the legacy of colonialism. That is, colonialism will now refer to, or post-colonial writing will refer to two types of writings. One type which is against colonialism and the other which is in favor of colonialism. colonialism नेक्स्ट कैरेक्टरिस्टिक है इसका मतलब यह है कि अगरचे इनको तो बड़ा एक सदमा पहुंचा था जब इन पे कब्जा किया गया, इनकी चीज़ों को लूटा गया, ज़बरदस्ती इनको इनकी लैंग्वेजेस सिखाई गई, दूसरों की लैंग्वेजेस, और इनके एनवायरनमेंट को ख़राब किया गया, कल्चर को, लाइवलीहुड सबको तबाह किया गया। तो जब इंडिपेंडेंस हुआ तो ये जो इफ़ेक्ट ऊपर बयान हुए, इनका असर फिर भी था। अगरचे इनकी लैंग्वेजेस को डिस्प्लेस किया गया, जो मकामी लैंग्वेजेस थे उसकी जगह मास्टर्स की लैंग्वेज आई, और यहाँ तक कि बाज़ों ने रिलीजन छोड़ा, क्रिश्चियनिटी फॉलो किया। तो जो पोस्ट कॉलोनियल नेशंस थे, और जब वो इंडिपेंडेंस भी उन्होंने हासिल कर ली, उसके बाद भी उन्होंने चाहा कि अपने मुल्क को वेस्टर्न स्टाइल यूरोपियन नेशंस पे मॉडल करें और उस किस्म की एडमिनिस्ट्रेटिव ब्यूरोक्रेटिक सेटअप बनाए। तो ये उन की जो कॉलोनियलिज्म हुई थी उसको फॉलो किया। तो जो राइटर थे फॉर्मरली कॉलोनाइज्ड कंट्रीज से, वो इस ऑब्सेशन में बाज मुब्तला थे, तो उन्होंने फेवर में लिखा। बाज जो इसकी ट्रामेटिक एक्सपीरियंस था उन्होंने अगेंस्ट लिखा। तो यूं जो पोस्ट कॉलोनियल लिटरेचर है या अगेंस्ट कॉलोनियलिज्म होगा या फेवर में भी हो सकता है, दोनों को हम पोस्ट कॉलोनियल लिटरेचर का नाम देंगे। और ये डीकोलोनाइजेशन के पीरियड के बाद भी ये असर जारी रहा, और कहा जाता है कि अब भी राइटर इस लेगेसी और इस विरसे को फॉलो करते हैं, कॉलोनियलिज्म को, जो कि दुरुस्त नहीं है। इसके अलावा और भी बहुत सारी कैरेक्टरिस्टिक हैं, लेकिन सिक्स सेमेस्टर के लिए बस इतना काफ़ी है, 3-4 कैरेक्टरिस्टिक। सो दैट्स ऑल फॉर नाउ। थैंक यू एंड गुड लक।